Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the New World, the Americas, what they meant, what they were, and how their quote-unquote discovery changed everything. Now, this picture right here is an early 16th century Finnish map of the Americas. This was for a lot of Europeans, the first view they had of what that new world looked like. And looking at this, you might notice a couple inconsistencies with how the Americas actually look. For example, Greenland is not connected to the rest of the United States at all. Hudson Bay does not extend that far south, and California is not actually an island, just to say a few. But let's get started. When we look at how peoples first started arriving in the Americas, we know that it took place anywhere from 15 to 60,000 years ago during a series of ice ages. The most recent Great Ice Age ended about 15,000 years ago. That was the last chance that the migration could have happened. Peoples going from Eurasia, northern Russia, walking across a frozen tundra of ice and snow that was the Arctic Sea. During this time, it was so cold, seawater froze so much that the people probably didn't even realize they were walking on frozen water and not just frozen dirt. Once they were in the Americas and that great ice age ends, the water melts, and if you were on this side of the ocean, you are going to be staying here. It's worth pointing out that this end of ice age and ice melting process didn't happen overnight. This was the kind of thing that took the better part of a generation to really end. But when it was over, it was over. The native people were a diverse group of people who are going to live throughout the Americas. Native Americans, founding Americans, first peoples, they are going to have a diverse group of languages, of cultures, of backgrounds, of societies, because of where they would settle, because of what's around them, because of what's nearby, because of what you're eating, because of what you're hunting, because of the climate, because of this vast diversification that takes place. There is no general uniform consensus of the Native American people. One of the most consistent agricultural things that we see throughout the Americas, and even this is not even all of the Americas, is the three sisters: corn, squash, and beans. They can be planted together, they contribute to the soil together, and collectively they make the dirt stronger from the nutrients that they leave behind of each one of them. And in some Native American cultures, the three sisters are woven into folklore and myth of good nutritional dirt. And you can even make, there's a lot of different recipes of three sister soups and stews. That's, corn, squash, beans soup. There's a lot that this diversification is one of the most central components of Native American study. We see that there are empires like the Incas and the Aztecs that are going to reign over giant swaths of territory. We see huge urban civilizations, towns. Cahoica would be a mound builder's town for all it was in the Mississippi Valley, a trading center that connected all throughout the Mississippi River. In the western United States, we have the pueblos. We have people who built their homes into the sides of caves and cliffs, and these would provide climate and a little bit of cooling lifestyle, especially if you're living in the desert. We see that some of these tribes are going to be very small and others are going to be very large. Some of these tribes are going to have hunter-gatherer aspects, and others are going to have fully developed cities. We have here the top right picture. That is one of those pueblo I was talking about earlier, and I've got a picture of Cahoica, a reimagined picture of Cahoica on one of my next slides. When the Spanish showed up and saw these pueblos, that was where the name came from. That was where they were called from this. On the eastern side of North America, you have the mix of hunting, farming, and fishing as well. Collectively, some of these tribal groups are even going to join together to create, in times of crisis, a great unified force. Most notably would be the 5 Iroquois tribes. These are the 5 tribal groups that would ultimately comprise the Iroquois that, when things got real bad, unified to either have great peace or have great war. On that top left, we've got Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, and the bottom right is Machu Picchu, capital of the Inca Empire. And these are real cities in a time where people could also be wildly nomadic. There was also wildly developed urban centers as well. Now, Cahokia is gone. That's the picture that's in the bottom right. It lasted up until the 17th century, but the mound builders, and you can see them in the top right picture, created these large earthen mounds to provide cities, to provide protection, to provide homestead, and some of these were even interconnected tunnel networks to provide you with some kind of climate controlled systems. And what's impressive about these types of things is it was all done prior to the development of metals. There was no advanced technology, what we would call in the Americas. There was virtually no metalwork. There were no guns, there was no gunpowder, there were no large ships, there was no steel, there was no concrete even. So the vast disparity between the development of Native Americans and Europeans would be one reason that the Europeans would justify conquering the natives. Look at how inferior their technology is to ours. Look at how, as the Europeans viewed it, backwards they are to us. In the Americas, there were no horses. There were no pigs. There were no beasts of burden. These were, well, the horses all died in the last great ice age, but the others just didn't exist. There's another map to show the idea of regional identity with Native American groups and how broad they could be. The role of religion for Native Americans was shaped by the tribe. If the tribe were hunters, then we see that there's a more akin to a great hunter or a great hunt or something akin to that. If there is providing for the people through hunting, or not hunting, agriculture, there is a great orchard or a great grove in these. And there is a common theme throughout Native American religions, which again vary extensively, on the idea of animism. the idea that an animal spirit exists to influence what's going on, that an animal spirit can help you, an animal spirit can guide you throughout your journey. Now, that can be a physical, where am I going kind of journey, or a I need help on this intangible matter type of journey. In a lot of Native American tribes, we see that shaman, that medicine men, held a lot of power in the people because this was the individual who could interpret the great spirits, who could interpret what's going on, who could understand, yes, when all the buffaloes start moving north, it means that summer is here and, you know, we can go north and not freeze to death anymore. And this animistic approach was, when Europeans start arriving in large numbers, another thing that Europeans are going to use to justify conquering the natives. Oh, look, they do not believe in our God. Oh, look, they do not believe in our way of things. They are therefore heathens and backwards, and we must help them. Probably one of the best indicator of an animistic contribution is the totem pole, a collection of carvings of different animalistic spirits that each combine to lend their aid to that tribe, to that group, to whomever needs it. When we get to the idea of Native Americans and how they viewed land, this is really different than what we see throughout most of Afro-Eurasia. For Native Americans, the land is a common thing. You might have the chief decide, okay, this area of land, this is going to that family this season, that area of land is going to that family over there. But largely speaking, it was not a crystal clear defined, this is my land, I paid for this land, I have a fence around this land, therefore this is mine. It is established that this is the land of the people. And it can move, and it can shape, and it can change as it needs to. The role of gift giving was also extremely important. The idea that this thing that I own, I am giving to you, even in a time where ownership of land does not exist, is instrumentally important. A lot of the societies that we see in Native America are matrilineal instead of patrilineal, which means that the family status, the family focus is on mom and not dad. Native American women could own their own homes, they could own their own tools, they could own their own animals. And this is, again, in stark contrast to in Western Europe. That did not happen. In Western Europe, in England, for example, when a woman was married, she surrendered her legal autonomy to her husband. And in some parts of the Americas, like in Western North America, Native American women performed the plurality of the agricultural work in hunter-gatherer societies. And this is something that was indicative to Paleolithic man that we see across Afro-Eurasia. When Europeans first encounter natives, there's a lot of differing views on how these groups are going to look at each other. Initially, the natives were viewed as usually one extreme or the other, either a noble savage or completely uncivilized barbarians. And as time went on, more and more folks viewed natives as the uncivilized barbarian. For the English, the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, they saw that since native persons weren't using the land in the typical fashion of European using the land, owning the land, that it was free to claim. And it was also viewed that Native Americans were not free. They did not have the idea of private property. They did not have the liberty of worshiping one distinct style. Their gender roles were all over the place. Therefore, these people are not free. And it was up to the Europeans to, therefore, quote unquote, help them. Freedom in Europe meant, above all, you embrace Christianity. This is the idea of Christian liberty. This is indicative throughout Western Europe since the 6th century. The nation decides which branch of Christianity you will practice. And if you do not practice in that style, then you will be persecuted. And persecution usually means tortured and or dead. Up until the 16th century, we see that the role of all of these religions is succinctly Roman Catholicism. It was the branch of Christianity that existed in Western Europe until Martin Luther infamously nailed his theses to the door. European kings like Louis XIV, depicted here, were absolute rulers. They got their power from Big G God. They ruled from divine right. Men had authority over women. They had total control and autonomy over their wives, passed on in the same way that a king is granted authority by Big G God. If you wanted to be involved in the government, you had to have land, and that was it. And even in countries that were monarchies, you need land to be even marginally involved in the government. And this is usually quite a bit of land. In some cases, it would be anywhere from 50 to 100 acres of your own personal property. And this is at a time where the average person doesn't have that. The average person is usually leasing their land from someone who owns it, their landed lord. So they have no voice in the government. They didn't have the ability to worship outside of this specific form of Christianity in front of them. Economically, their chance of mobility, it also did not exist. So freedom in Europe was still this hampered, stringent thing. By the end of the 15th century, we see three different great explorers of this time period. Depicted here, we have from left to right, Zheng He, the great admiral of the Yan, then Ming dynasty, who sailed thousands of ships across the Indian Ocean, the China Sea, and would eventually reach West Africa. We have Vasco da Gama, who was the first European to learn you could actually get to India by waterways. Up until this point, it had been trading with the Muslim middlemen. But if you can get there yourself, you can cut them out, and you can then bring back a quite literal boatload of goods from the Indies. And you've got Christopher Columbus. Now, in a follow-up video to this one, there is a breakdown of what each of these men did and a larger perspective, a larger contribution to them that will follow this video. I encourage you to take a look at it and understand that as far as explorers went, these guys did a lot. Portugal sits at the end of the European peninsula, at the end of the Iberian Peninsula. They have nowhere to go. They are buffered by Spain, and they are the furthest west. They understood that this meant if they wanted to expand, they're going to have to get creative in doing so. And they start by doing this age of exploration by going around Africa, and they establish trading posts along West Africa. And this is going to be really huge in eventually reaching India. India is the goal. If you can get there, it's payday every day. But you still got to get there. We see that there's going to be the discovery of small island groups near Africa, near Portugal, that are going to be launching off positions. And aside from, hey, look, I can now get to Africa by way of water, and I am now sailing south of the Sahara into the green part of Africa, we see within the last part of the 15th century, slave exportation begins to Portugal and to Spain. And about 100,000 slaves from Africa will be taken to Europe. Now, these slaves were criminals, they were captives. In Africa, you could be enslaved for having a great debt, for doing some heinous crime, or for being a captive in war. Slavery in Africa had existed for an extremely long time. And when Portuguese or Spanish show up and want to take these people away, the Portuguese and Spanish, the Europeans, will buy the slaves. And this is usually for that nation a pretty good deal. This criminal, this person who owes debt, this captive from a war, is going away, never to bother society again. And in exchange, I am receiving money, or usually a tool or a gun. Guns would become the most common thing to trade for slaves over the course of the next few centuries. And in the last part of the 16th century, there were 100,000 slaves that were taken to Spain and Portugal. And a decade after Columbus's landing, we see the first group of slaves are actually going to go to the Caribbean Isles. Now, Columbus, he's a complicated fella. He didn't think the world was flat. He just didn't think it was as big as it actually was. There were a lot of works who said the Earth is as big as it is. This dated back to Eratosthenes from classical Greece. So we knew the Earth was round. We knew the size of the Earth for the better part of 2.5 millennia before Columbus even got in the water. But he believed his own calculations so much that, well, he had to have been right. He wasn't right, not by a long shot. In October of 1492, Columbus finally is gifted the resources to go on the expedition. His goal was get to India faster than going all the way around Africa. The thought is, if I go west and the world is round, and everyone agreed to that, then you could get to India, specifically the East Indies, the Spice Islands, where the big money is. That was the goal. And when you hear about it like this from a guy like him, a lot of people said, no, I'm not going to give you the money. No, you're not going to earn this money. What are you, crazy? Get out of here. In 1492, Spain ends the wars known as the Reconquista. Spain is united under the banner of Christendom, and the Spanish nation is shaped a lot like it looks now. Columbus used the fact that, hey, look at this great accomplishment that just happened, wouldn't this other accomplishment make us even richer? Wouldn't that be good to do now? And the king and queen of Spain, they throw in and say, sure, why not? No reason not to. He had a couple other backers, but Ferdinand and Isabella were definitely the big ones. There's a couple conditions to his expedition. Columbus earns the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea, a fun title to say the least. He gains political control of any discovered lands that are not claimed by somebody else, and Columbus will personally receive 10% of all profits made in trade with anywhere he lands. So this is a ridiculously good deal. He sets forth 30 days after leaving Spain, he winds up in the Bahamas. And remember, when he's leaving, most people are seeing him sail off into the distance thinking he is never coming home again. And holy cow, he finds land, and he finds the West Indies, quote unquote. We will ignore the fact that finding is the wrong word. I understand that it is the wrong word. There were millions of people living in the Americas first. They definitely found it first. Hell, the Vikings found it first. Columbus hit a couple of big problems very early on. When he was getting ready to come back to Spain, one of his 3 ships crashed. It ran up on the rocks, and they couldn't get it off. So he had to leave behind the ship and 38 people with the promise that I'm going to be back. People are going to want to see this. And those people knew that he was going to come back. They didn't believe that he was going to abandon them, because this discovery was huge. They had arrived in where they thought was the East Indies, Indonesia. They had acquired a little bit of gold, not a lot, some foodstuffs they had never seen before, but they also took with them 10 native peoples. Columbus took 10 Native Americans with him on the ships to go back to Spain. And these guests were the pride of Spain. It was unprecedented like this. And for those 10 people, I can only imagine how terrifying that would have been. The thought that here is a ship I cannot even comprehend of, with people who look nothing like me, speaking a language I've never heard of before, with cloth and steel and guns, and now I have been taken by them. It would be like being abducted by space aliens. It would be that extreme. Within the first decade of Columbus's landing, we have the first permanent settlement set up. Columbus tried to establish a settlement in 1494. It completely and utterly failed. It took until 1502 when Nicola de Ovando actually got a real settlement there. That same year, Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian cartographer, was sailing down South America and essentially drawing the map of what South America looked like, and he is the one who is credited with the realization we are not in the East Indies. This is an entire new continent. This is not just a couple of small islands. This appears on no maps, and his discovery is where we credit the name of this landmass. Columbus's landing transformed everything, and this is the kind of thing that's going to go on to impact so much more of the history of the Americas. So today we talked about some components of Native American life, the religion, the social order, as well as what things looked like in Western Europe leading up to the quote-unquote discovery. Hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.